Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk ETC. I have Yaz Khoury of the ETC Cooperative. He's been on the show before, and he's going to be discussing Ethercluster. So welcome, Yaz.
Thank you, Christian, for having me. Very happy to be here and talk about Ethercluster.
Great. So for the people that don't know your background and all the great things you do for the community, why don't you kind of give a little recap, introduce yourself again?
Sure, yeah. So I work for the Ethereum Classic Cooperative, the nonprofit that is, in charge of, serving the ETC community through development and marketing. So my role is the Director of Developer Relations. So it's mostly working on open source tools and products that can allow other developers to adopt ETC as their development environment and to deploy to ETC. So we try to do a lot of interesting projects. In the past, I worked on Google BigQuery in collaboration with Google. We put ETC on the net, on Google servers so people can query it and analyze the chain. I also worked on a Raspberry Pi project, and we worked on a research paper called Quantifying Immutability to analyze different chains in immutability. The current project I'm working on is Ethercluster, which is an open source alternative to Infura.
Okay. Yeah. So the way that I became aware of a lot of those previous projects is you put out nice articles that I see on Reddit. Yeah. So, and then how did you get involved in, or what were you doing before you worked for ETC Cooperative?
Yeah. So, but my background originally was in robotics and electronics. And I did that, I was really passionate about it, did a lot of interesting robotic projects for NASA and others that were covered by TechCrunch. But then because it was low demand for these kind of gigs, I moved to software development, and I worked for a social media startup company called Social Flow for 3 years, doing all sorts of things. I wore a lot of hats, but it really taught me how to be a really good hacker. In terms of understanding Linux and developing different tools and web development and all that. I spent 3 years there before moving to Ethereum Classic Cooperative. I started in November 2018, and I've been loving it ever since.
Great. So you are multi-talented, right? You have hardware knowledge, software knowledge, and then also marketing and people skills.
Yeah, I'd like to focus on more breadth rather than depth, because I'm really interested in a lot of different technologies, and I think just having one profession focusing on one aspect of technology is not really that interesting for me. So I'm really interested in different aspects of technology.
Okay. All right. So why don't we get into it then? So Ethercluster is your current project. And right. I can personally see, I needed something, I still need something like Ethercluster. So it personally is important to me, but I'll let you introduce it. Why don't you do it?
Yeah, it's important in the sense that if you look at Infura is described in the blockchain world as the secret weapon of Ethereum. For the past year, we wanted to provide similar sort of services to the Ethereum Classic community. We've been talking to Infura for a long time, and they didn't it just took slower than we anticipated to have Ethereum Classic supported on that, on that product. So I decided with Anthony, who was the director of the ETC Cooperative back then, to build a scalable infrastructure and open source it so other people can use it as well. And the open source part allows decentralization, so you can run your own, using your own types of environment and stuff and not rely on our endpoint. It's important because it allowed anyone to connect to the Ethereum Classic network easily.
Yeah, so the personal use case where I stumbled upon the need for such a service was, so I was designing a smart contract application for a client, and they were going to need access to the network, to a node. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to set them up a ETC node, and they're going to have to manage it and keep it operating 24/7. And then I thought, well, wait, maybe there's a service that provides access to a node, and that was how that's what got me thinking about this service. And so that's basically what you're offering, right? If somebody that's making a smart contract product, doing anything with the blockchain, and then they don't need to necessarily run their own node to provide a service unless they want to.
Exactly, right. So so I'm very happy that you would find it of use. Like, a lot of people have talked about how useful it is, and we also wanted to make it open source so people can understand how it works on the back end, and maybe they can improve upon it as well. Because look at Infura. Infura is using AWS only. Now, currently, our design uses Google Cloud, but we want to make it multi-cloud. So you can have it deployed on both in Google, AWS, and Azure, Microsoft Azure. And then you can provide a much better decentralization of that kind of service that in case anything happened with one of the cloud providers, like their farm shuts down or something like that, you still have that kind of assurance that you'll be connected to a very highly available service and stuff.
Yeah, right. And so people, as many people know, the issue with, I'll just run my own ETC node on my laptop or whatever is right. You have to keep it running all the time. And some people might not want to do that on their own.
Absolutely. It's one of the main hurdles for a lot of people, maintaining a node. And a lot of people, there's a lot of developers who are not comfortable working with cloud products, right? They'd rather develop locally and just push maybe to GitHub, some sort of software, especially if you're starting to learn how to develop. So providing an endpoint rather than running your own node makes it really easy for a lot of developers to be onboarded into the system, right?
Right.
And for people who are non-technical, the way I describe Ethercluster to them is if we think about the internet, right? Let's say you're having a party and you invite 5 people over and they all want to connect to your Wi-Fi, right? So now if 5 more people try to come over, they want to connect to your Wi-Fi, what happens to the Wi-Fi? It slows down like the internet, right? So Ethercluster basically is providing another Wi-Fi router to connect more people, and they keep doing that, scales that. So, but instead of the Wi-Fi, you think of it as the blockchain. It's connecting people to the blockchain in a scalable manner.
Right. So you just fire up more ETC nodes as the demand increases, I assume, or
yes.
Okay. And so, was there any other issues? I'm curious, how difficult was it to achieve, scalability? Was there any tricky things about that?
Yeah. So to clarify, I've never done DevOps before. I mean, I was very comfortable in Linux. I can only code from terminal, so I love terminal. This is my only environment. But I've just never worked in actual DevOps before, except I was really interested in it. So I just had to learn everything myself from February onwards. I talked to some engineers who I respect them a lot in the DevOps world, and they provided me some learning material, and I just adopted it. There's a lot of different cool technologies in infrastructure world that Ethercluster adopts. The first one is Docker. Docker is a containerization system for your application. So you don't have to worry about what your instance, the libraries that are installed on your server and stuff like that. You can actually containerize it where it references the main kernel of your instance, but it separates the installation service of each application, and then it basically decouples it. So you can have different applications containerized, and they can communicate with each other without worrying about installation and stuff that might affect different sorts of products.
Right.
And it's actually very popular right now. A lot of people love Docker and stuff, especially the Ethereum Classic community. A lot of people try to Dockerize a lot of applications that are provided to our community from GitHub.
So it's, yeah, in my, and I don't have that much experience with Docker, but it's basically a way to avoid a lot of the system administration headaches.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And then after that, the most cutting edge orchestration tool is called Kubernetes. So if you think about Kubernetes basically allow you to compose from a high level a lot of different Docker images, and like basically like an architecture for your Docker images across your cluster, and they distributed it automatically and stuff. So you can have a Docker container for parity, which is running Ethereum Classic, and you can specify, oh, I want 4 different copies of the parity node running, and you can then set it to auto scale based on demand to like maybe 8 nodes, and then you can just monitor it and stuff.
Oh, okay. So it's called Kubernetes?
Kubernetes, yes. It's like it was originally built at Google, and then it became open source, and Google handed it over to a nonprofit organization to run it. And it's super cool. Like,
yeah, okay, I can see it. So that has a lot of intelligence for how to gracefully spin up new nodes as needed using Docker. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the same time, you can deploy a lot of different open source DevOps tool on your Kubernetes cluster that would improve Ethercluster as well. So yeah, it's the most cutting edge DevOps.
Yeah. Now, can you speak more about that? You said you mentioned that already. You mentioned it before that people can add their own services. So, because when I think of these type of services, I think of you just accept what they give you, but you're saying that you can add your own.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
Might understand that.
So, I'm currently actually fooling around with some of that technology, but basically it allows you with like a few lines of code to deploy Jenkins, for example, which is the CI/CD tool that DevOps love.
Okay, wait, so I'm going to have to stop you right there. Can you explain what CI/CD and Jenkins?
Yeah, sorry, for sure. Continuous integration, continuous delivery. It allows you for like a centralized way to deploy your software, whatever software you're building, let's say for a website, and to run all the tests necessary on that kind of tool. And then after that test pass, it would deploy to your environment, like whether it's development or product and stuff. So it allows for like a predictable way of replicating things and allowing all tests to pass on your website. So let's say if a test fails on your website before you deploy it, you would want to, you would find that easily on Jenkins, which is the tool that is used for continuous integration and delivery.
Okay, and there's advantages in having that integrated with Ethercluster with the node setup that people are using?
Yeah. So personally, for like my use case, if you look at the website for Ethercluster, there's no user sign up. There's nothing. It's not tracking you or anything. It's just like it's pure HTML, right? To display that kind of information. So I don't really need Jenkins for my use case, but like I would want to, like, let's say if you're a dApp developer, you have your Ethercluster backend, and you want to add the HTML for it because you're building a dApp for your scalable architecture. Having Jenkins would be really, really helpful for you because it allows you to replicate tests for your dApp and have it all in one environment that you can understand yourself.
Okay. All right. Good. So we can. So Ethercluster is extensible. It's easily scalable.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, and it uses Docker and what was the other, the code?
Kubernetes.
Kubernetes. Okay. Is there any other interesting technology components you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, for sure. There's also a really, really cool tool called Terraform, like terraforming a planet. Terraform is created by HashiCorp. It allows you to use infrastructure as code, like writing code that would translate to a cloud architecture. And so let's say you want to build because when you go on AWS, you can specify, I want 4 different Linux instances to run up, and I want them in this region, that region, and that region, and I want this much gigabyte for mine for one instance, and like 200 for another, etc. So over time, it like especially for engineers, using a GUI slows you down if you want to complicate your architecture more. So what Terraform does is allows you to declare it as code, and then it applies it either to Google Cloud or AWS or Azure. And this is like one of the most exciting DevOps tools that is coming out right now.
Oh, okay. So now that's quite impressive. So if I understand you correctly, you want to make a sophisticated scripting interface that allows people to control Ethercluster in very detailed ways, the same way that people manage their AWS instances. Is that correct?
Exactly. And it's replicable because it's all in code that can be forked and modified and adopted, like expanded upon. So Terraform is one of the most exciting tools coming out, because the idea of Terraform, using Terraform in our case, is what we want to do is have a few nodes running on AWS, a few on Google Cloud, and a few on Azure. And the tool to use that is Terraform. So and a lot of people are excited about it on Twitter. Like one engineer in London, I think he wanted to expand it to AWS. So hopefully we're working together on building that. That's what I love about open source. It's exciting a lot of people to improve upon the design that I, presented to the world.
Right. Okay. Oh, okay. So all right. Okay. So originally I had imagined a simple system where everybody gets a single node that they access, and a lot of people are sharing the same node. But you're providing and plan to provide a much more sophisticated infrastructure than I was originally thinking.
Yeah, because at the same time, a lot of people are there's a lot of barriers to entry for having a good infrastructure, and a lot of people have to rely on third-party services that cost them money. Now, I mean, running Ethercluster, you need to have some sort of investment in it because it's running more than one node for you. And it's doing it in the cloud. So it makes more sense if you're a DApp developer who wants to, you have a few users and stuff. You don't have to rely on a third-party service. You can have your really sophisticated infrastructure. And you don't have to rely even on Cloudflare, which, as you know, a few weeks ago, it got shut down, and it shut down a lot of websites. And Cloudflare was also offered an Ethereum endpoint, but that's the problem with centralized services, that even if you're connected to the Ethereum endpoint on Cloudflare, it could have gone offline for a few hours.
Right. Okay. So then the idea is, if somebody that has a very successful smart contract application with a huge number of users, then they could take advantage of detailed requirements with Ethercluster. Okay, I see.
You can simplify the design. The design can be simplified because to be as much as probably $50 to $100, depending on your needs. Because if you have more traffic, you need to scale it, right? So it depends on your needs. Or the other alternative is to connect to our endpoint that we provide as a proof of concept, and it's scalable and it works, and you can just connect to that instead if you want.
So then, do you have a payment system? Like if somebody wants to go crazy and use a lot of bandwidth, then does it go from a free initial service to something that you pay for?
No, we're not going to charge for it, but we are going to rate limit it in the future. So I'm monitoring it to see the usage and stuff, and I would rate limit it in the future. And I would tell them how to not rate limit it on their own design, because we're a nonprofit, it would become really expensive for us to maintain a really, really large Ethercluster. Especially if so many people are connected to it. But at the same time, I am looking for funding on the side for the cooperative in order to fund Ethercluster more and expand it and grow it. So it becomes like even better than Infura, in my opinion. Infura, at the end of the day, is providing you scalable infrastructure for Ethereum, and it adds a lot of bells and whistles like IPFS and all these other things. Now, I love IPFS actually, and we are in discussion with other engineers about integrating IPFS into Ethercluster.
Right. Now, I'm just wondering, what if it becomes super successful and you're getting hammered by massive numbers of people that want more hardware than you're capable of providing. So you talked about getting funding, but it would seem that eventually you might reach a point, and this isn't right now, but where you want to charge just because the demand keeps growing so much.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a demand in the future and somebody wants to charge, I'm not sure about how a nonprofit can charge for such a service. Like, I'm not sure about the legal behind it.
Right.
But at the same time, that's the main reason we open sourced it, right? So let's say a lot of really sophisticated engineers, they need to connect to the network. They're connecting to our network, our endpoint, and then they complain to us that, hey, it's not as fast as we hope it to be. And then we're like, okay, we did provide a documentation and open source toolings in order for you to run your own, because it would save us money in the long term, especially if you have really high needs for it.
Right. Oh, okay. So yes, that's the open source aspect. So you're basically making it easy for people to create their own clone of Ethercluster or Infura, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Very cool. Is there any other technology you want to mention that we haven't covered? We've covered a lot of pieces of it. Anything else?
Yeah. So the other one I'm playing around with this week is Prometheus. It's created by SoundCloud, like a really cool monitoring and alerting system for your cluster. So I'm trying to deploy that on the Ethercluster and trying to figure out how to set up really cool monitoring dashboards, depending on requests per second, how much CPU usage and memory, and to get alerted maybe by text or email in case for specific types of notifications.
Okay, yeah, good. So you just have the dream job. You get to have all kinds of fun setting up.
Yeah, I mean, you're just build a lot of open source stuff and make sure it connects to ETC and just developer relations. For me, it is my dream job because I love open source. I love building products and proof of concept and prototypes, and I like to blog about it, and tell people about it, and hopefully more developers would adopt ETC.
Right.
On all the marketing and development that we're doing.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's generating interest, right? You said you had somebody that wanted to help provide AWS as a back end. Is that correct?
Yeah, so somebody wanted to do AWS at a back end. I had two different people from two different competitors to Infura message me wanting to talk about Ethercluster. One of them, I think, wants to adopt Kubernetes at their back end because of what I talked about in Ethercluster. So they tell you that node provider services don't even use Kubernetes right now. A lot of them don't.
Right.
Another one was just like an engineer who said, I have Kubernetes already, and I have my own dApp, but I'm connected to Infura using the URL, and I don't like that. So I'm going to use Ethercluster to build the Ethereum part of it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So then my hope for you is what you said that comes true. I hope that because it's open source, you get so much interest and support and patches that you fold into Ethercluster that it just becomes it becomes the best solution for the problem you're trying to solve. And it's open source and more people use it.
Well, thank you. I really hope that happens. I do want to I have a lot of ideas for funding it just to improve the design and stuff. And I am also on the side working on a private repo for the command line interface using Golang. So that with the command line interface, what I hope is that using just few lines of command, like Ethercluster build, and this would build you a default AWS or G Cloud infrastructure, and then and then you type Ethercluster generate or something, and it's just like generate your Kubernetes infrastructure, and then you have it ready within 2 commands. So that's the other thing I'm working on. The CLI app.
Very cool. All right, so then why don't we kind of switch then in the end of our segment? Why don't we kind of talk about the future? I've kind of shared my hopes and dreams, and you kind of alluded a little bit, but where do you see in a couple of years? What do you hope for Ethercluster?
So for Ethercluster, what I hope in a couple of years is that we can actually have a lot of different designs and references for other networks as well. And the reason for that is, even though it started as an Ethereum Classic project, I received a lot of interest from different networks who do want to mess around with it and stuff. And we don't have to just limit it to RPC provided. We can talk about just node validation, like private node validation using Ethercluster. I also want to, in the future, I hope to have a specific design for testing. So how do you test different clients communicating with each other on Ethercluster for, let's say, an upcoming hard fork, like let's say Atlantis for ETC or something, to test all the hard fork exchanges and stuff. So I think that would be really cool.
Okay. Yeah. Good. You just brought. So, if by supporting other networks, other blockchain systems, I imagine that would increase the amount of eyeballs analyzing your code, which would only lead to more patches and more improvements.
Exactly. And the more engineers, the better it is for the network, and the better it is for other engineers working on other networks. Because at the end of the day, if you look at engineers, they're not really political. They're just like techies, and the network for them is just a feature, right? So they want so why would you waste development effort replicating it on different networks when you can just pool it all together and have a design specification for blockchain infrastructure?
Right. And then also a lot of the improvements aren't necessarily super specific to one blockchain like ETC, right? Like if you make a better tool to coordinate your network of nodes, that could be applicable to lots of different systems.
Right. Yeah. So, yes. So with other networks at the same time, because it's a Docker container parity, I mean, you can change it for another Docker container depending on the network you're trying to run, right?
Right.
It becomes really, really easy. So at the same time, for people who really want to have fun with this stuff, like any other network that might do staking in the future, having a scalable infrastructure for staking, Ethercluster can provide that too, like maybe for ETH2 or something like that.
Right. And then for people that are concerned about centralization, decentralization, I guess you kind of answered it already, because the fact that the tooling is open source, people can always make their own clones. But you want to say anything else about any concerns about centralization?
Yeah, it is a valid concern. There's a lot of aspects of centralization that we want to solve. One of them is we want to make it multi-regional. So say you're using only Google Cloud. You can deploy your cluster, your instances to different regions within a zone. So region, let's say North America East, or in New York and something, and you deploy it to different data centers. So one instance in each data center, that's multi-regional, and it actually decentralizes it more, because if one server farm is offline, the other two can actually keep running your deployment and stuff. So that's one aspect of decentralization. The other one is multi-cloud, we talked about and stuff. And it's 3 different networks and different cloud providers like Microsoft, AWS, and Google Cloud. The final one, I didn't think about it much, but I was toying with the idea. But somebody today in Discord on ETC messaged me about it. He said his main concern was we're deploying our Kubernetes cluster to centralized cloud providers like the 3 names that I mentioned before: AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft.
Right.
He would rather do it on his own hardware and just deploy his Kubernetes on his own hardware. He'll generate his own VM virtual machines and deploy Kubernetes on each one. And actually, that improves decentralization a lot, And I loved that idea. And I told him like, yeah, whenever, if you just decide to open source it, it'll be really cool.
Right. So all these people that are concerned about or they want decentralization, they'll help you to make it more and more decentralized. So it'll keep, very cool. So it'll keep getting better. All right. So I think you've given a great introduction to Ethercluster and the potential now and in the future. Is there anything else before we close that I forgot to ask or that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, so I think for the future as well, all my following projects, like I'm toying with a different ideas for project in the future, like decentralized oracles or machine learning for ETC, or maybe robotics, like a small robotic project for ETC. All of them, I'll try to like reference them to always use Ethercluster, so that Ethercluster can have a lot of guides and tutorials for like different variety of different projects and stuff.
Okay. All right. And so let me just add to what you said. So anybody listening that's interested in Ethercluster, Yaz Khoury is happy to talk to you, and it's open source. And so you're welcome to join and provide improvements and join the community. So yes. Okay. So thank you, Yaz, for that informative talk, and good luck with all the great work you're doing. Best wishes.
Thank you, Christian, for having me. It's been like such a great talk. Yeah, I'm very happy about the future of Ethercluster. I'm really excited about it.
Yes, very good. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.